Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and welcome to NewsX. In a dramatic shake-up of US military leadership, US President Donald Trump has fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Air Force General, and pushed out 5 admirals, including the first woman to lead the Navy, Admiral Lisa Franchetti. In a post on Truth Social, Trump announced his nomination of retired Lieutenant General Caine to become the new Air Force General, marking the first time a retired officer has been brought back for such a top role. The changes come amidst criticism of military leadership during Trump's 2024 campaign, where he vowed to remove so-called woke generals, particularly those involved in the 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. Adding to the turbulence, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth raised concerns over General Brown's appointment, suggesting race may have played a role. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is planning cuts to its civilian workforce, potentially laying off up to 5,400 employees next week, further reshaping the future of US military operations. Joining us to discuss this shake-up and its implications, we have many guests today. First up, we have Elizabeth Larris, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, joining us from Washington. We also have Adrian Calamel, a terrorism scholar and fellow at the Arabian Peninsula, joining us from New York. We have Major General Gigi Dawedi, a global strategic defence expert, and finally Rabinder Sachdev, a foreign affairs expert. Elizabeth, I would like to come to you first. How unprecedented is this Pentagon shake-up?
Well, I think all at once, like all at one time, it's pretty dramatic. And we certainly know former presidents, Obama, I think over 5 years replaced about 200 senior leaders. I think most of them, all of them were generals. So this was not anticipated, by the way. Look, we knew that when Secretary Hegseth was meeting senators in advance of his confirmation hearings, that he said, we are going to shake up the senior leadership. And here is a slate of candidates that we are probably going to can. And so I suspect a lot of these people knew that this was coming. Perhaps they just didn't know when. But the president does have at his discretion the ability, the authorization to pick his topmost generals that he wants, carrying out policy for him.
Adrian, thank you for joining us. For our audience who might not understand Trump's reasoning behind this, of course, we mentioned already during his election campaign, he said he wanted to make changes and he said he was going to. But what is his frustration with the military and its leaders?
Thank you for having me here, Joshua. I think part of the frustration with the military and the leaders is just seeing that what's happened over the last 5 years, there really hasn't been a whole lot of leadership. And that starts, he is the commander-in-chief. We cannot forget that. But we see some, General McKenzie, Milley, Austin, you look at the way they handled things such as Afghanistan, and that immediately was a black stain on them. So you can see a dark stain on them. And you can see that it just, there were people that were, there's a problem in the U.S. military and with personnel, and I would say that once, I can say this, I don't always feel comfortable saying not being a military person, but I've heard it from military people that, once people get to a certain level and get that certain stripe on their sleeve, they stop becoming generals and military men and start becoming politicians. And I think that's where Trump is seeing most of his frustration, is that the military men are not military men right now, or military women, they're politicians in a lot of cases. And I think that's one reason why you bring in somebody like Hegseth and start to look at the non-commissioned officers, the individuals who are doing a lot of the commanding on the battlefield. I think when I saw Hegseth appointed, I thought immediately is he the right guy, number one? But I could see there was an approach, or at least an idea, that the NCOs, such as Hegseth, the individuals that are on the battlefield, not fighting wars, are the ones that have the best knowledge, know how to prosecute a war, and won't become political about it in the process while on the battlefield.
Major General Gigi Dawedi, thank you for being here. With your expertise being on defence and the military, can you give us an understanding of what will actually happen now these people have been fired and how impactful this shake-up can be for the US military?
Well, first and foremost, let me share that I have operated quite closely with the American Armed Forces and trained with them, so I understand the ethos, the traditions of the American Armed Forces. First and foremost, I would like to share the American Armed Forces are very professional, they are handpicked, and the system of promotion and merit, I think, is well tested and is in place. Secondly, all armed forces, they are very proud of their traditions, they're very proud of the ethos, they're very proud of the system because the system is paramount in any professional army. So when you try to shake up the system, then it has a cascading effect on the whole pyramid because the people who are eased out before the time in the armed forces, they are deemed to be fired or they are underperformed, which doesn't send a good message because once you select people at the rank of the generals, they have made their way through and they have filtered and they have reached that stage with high degree of merit. But at the same time, the commander-in-chief, the presidents have a choice. And as we know, President Trump's personality, he is a person who has very strong likes and dislikes. And I think the two basic issues that we need to understand here. One is the basic fundamental they are working upon, that is the diversity, equality, inclusiveness. So there is a certain amount of, I would say, perception among the current dispensation that some of the people who have made it on top may not be entirely on merit, but maybe due to the factor of diversity, equality, and inclusiveness. So I'll make 2-3 important points. Firstly, armed forces are very different from the corporates or from the political setup because they are deeply embedded in traditions. Secondly, certain shaking of the system would have definitely cascading effect down below, and it does impact the morale because, let me tell you, the armed forces fight on morale. You win wars with weapons, but it's the people who handle the weapon win the wars. So I don't think it's going to send a very, very positive message. And the third very important point is that when you select the warriors, when you select the people on top, and you certainly dismiss them or you ease them out, well, then this whole process of selection undercomes this scrutiny. And I think to that extent, I feel that this shake-up is not going to send a very positive message down the file because it's definitely going to impact the morale and also question the very system and the process that goes in to select the people at the highest level. Over to you.
Yes, and Rabinder Sachdev, thank you for waiting while our other guests spoke there. Is this just the case, in your opinion, that Trump is appointing the people that align with him, potentially over his sort of frustrations with the current regime? Or is this just the case of the departments and the heads of these military groups needing refreshing after spending such long in post?
Everything all together. In a big picture, the way I look, what is happening in the United States today is, I call it, and I've written a book on this coming out in 2 weeks' time, Trumpotopia, Trump's Utopia. What is it that he wants? Trump is embarking on a re-governmenting of America. It is not a mere reform. You know, typically you say that, okay, you reform the military, you reform the economic agenda, etc. There's a complete re-governmenting approach with which Trump and his advisors are tackling this situation. It means a clean state. Just reimagine what government should be, and that's what they're doing. That's one. So complete re-governmenting of America is what we're going to see and what we're seeing already bit by bit happening. That's one. Now, specifically with respect to defense, I think there are 3 layers to it. The first layer is that loyalty. Trump demands and wants loyalty. In his Trump 1 administration, he was issuing some orders which the generals did not carry through. In Syria, other places, he's been very unhappy with it. Right. So as the commander-in-chief, he thinks and he wants that what I say, my military wing should jump and act on it. So that's one big part, loyalty. What I say has to happen. That's one. Second, yes, as all of our colleagues have mentioned here, fat. Yes, there is, and there could be fat. There is fat in any bureaucracy, in any administrative system. There is fat in, in India, by the way, there's a huge controversy about USAID funds for whatever, etc. And, USAID development funds being shut down. Yes, there is fat in that. There may have been some corruption, I don't think, but could be some. But fat has to be reduced. Systems have to be made more efficient. Same applies to the Defense Department and to the military. So there's fat in the military. To the extent they can eliminate that fat, to that extent, the US can allocate and make more. It doesn't mean that the defense budgets are going to go down, by the way. Defense budgets for US, we will see in the coming time, will actually be going up. But first they want to get rid of the fat as per their doctrine. So one is bureaucracy and loyalty. Trump wants a loyal, I say this, do this, boom, done. Second, a fact. And third is, yes, as again our eminent panelists commented, the element of the woke and transgender and all, etc., which also, it depends which way of the prism you are looking at, is there. So like, only two genders, male, female, no transgender, etc. Because that element is a huge element or a portion of Trump and his base, the MAGA base, their ideology, their worldview. Hegseth became defense secretary probably because of the fact that he was going, hammer and tongs at the woke perspective of the diversity, inclusion, etc. He was going after he was ferreting out what he thought were, the American defense establishment compromising, as he would say, on diversity, DEI. There is a case, it could have been that, but on the other, whatever. So big picture is that loyalty Trump wants. Whoever is there has to do clearly what he tells. He wants those officers there. And that is rooted in his experience from his first term, when he issued orders which are not followed not only by the military, by other departments also, with whom that is what the deep state, that what Trump calls.
Yes.
Right. And the fat and the woke element. And lastly, quickly to the point of Adrian, which you mentioned, NCOs, a very important point you made, sir. Non-commissioned officers. If you look between Trump 1 and Trump 2, in Trump 1, he had, with the context of the established Republican, this thing, generals, retired generals, etc., at his top layers, cabinet, chief of staff, etc., I forget whatever, right? This time round, there are no generals. There are NCOs, the non-commissioned officers. So what he's saying, Hegseth was never a general. Yes, he had military experience. Tulsi Gabbard was never a general. She was there. So this time round, there's a big distinction between the army veterans whom Trump is taking into his cabinet versus in Trump 1. In Trump 1, the generals were holding the fort and positions of influence. Now the generals are out. It is the NCOs who are in his cabinet.
Yes, Adrian, I want to pick back up on the diversity, equity and inclusion. Of course, it's been a very controversial topic throughout Trump's the end of Trump's campaign and since he's become the 47th president of the United States. Do you think that this move is in any way related? Of course, C.Q. Brown is only the second ever black person to take that role, in terms of as well a top female officer. So in those instances, do you think this is just a sort of situation and a coincidence, or is this sending out a clearer message on that?
No, I think this is, I think he's honestly going through evaluating each person at these high-ranking positions and figuring out if they're the best person for the job. I mean, these are important positions where you need the best person and the most qualified person, regardless of their race, gender, you name it. So that's what it comes down to. It comes down to find the most qualified candidates for these positions. And, as Elizabeth had pointed out, I think a lot of people knew this was coming, that there was a cleaning of the House coming. And as Ravinder was saying, this is both personnel and it's the systemic fat that you get in a bureaucracy or within the Pentagon, these type of things. So I don't think it's related to diversity, equity, inclusion. It's more coincidence that they're just not the right people for the job.
Yes, and Elizabeth, looking at trimming the fat as it's been described in this discussion, we know that the Pentagon workforce of around 950,000 is set to face some workforce cuts as well. Up to 5,400 expected this coming week, but there's talk about a potential 5 to 8% of the workforce being cut, and that could see 50,000 to around 75,000 jobs going. Is this just a continuation of Trump and Doge and the top teams looking at really trimming down these departments, or is this potentially going to leave the Pentagon short-staffed in any way?
Wow, I don't think, like you said, we have 950,000 approximately people working at the Pentagon, and we're cut 70,000 out. Like, I think they're going to be okay, right? Perhaps there's a question of, if you cut this many people, are you losing some institutional memory? It depends on who you are cutting. But Pete Hegseth had said very clearly in his confirmation hearings that we have more 4-star Army generals now than we have had since World War II. In World War II, the United States had 7 Army 4-star Army generals. Now there are 44. I'm sure they earned it. I am not going to, as a civilian, I am not going to criticize anyone in the military, but I kind of leave those numbers, on the table. So that is what Hegseth is talking about. Now, regarding our adversaries watching this will continue to unfold. One thing that I found very, very interesting, if I may say here now, is not only is Trump getting rid of a bunch of the military brass, the senior leaders, that he's actually seeking nominations for new JAG officers. And that is the lawyer corps that determines if military actions are consistent with the Constitution. So I'm keeping my eye on to see, excuse me, what may develop there. In this shakeup. I mean, the other thing I wanted to note too is when we're talking about DEI, we're throwing this term around. A lot of so-called DEI woke programs at the Pentagon, they were ordained by Congress. Congress has tremendous involvement in the U.S. military, and it's Congress that imposed a lot of those woke programs on the U.S. military. And they're spending too much time with woke ideology and sitting in meetings and doing modules, as we've all had to do at our places of employment, rather than working on how to be a lean, mean killing machine. I'm sorry, I'm a scholar of China, and we saw this during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, where the military is spending hours studying Mao Zedong thought, and it weakened them tremendously. So much so that when they fought against Vietnam in '79 and thought they were going to win decisively, they got a bloody nose. And we see the same thing in China happening now, the ideology, and people saying, "Ooh, that's weakening the Chinese military." Well, you spend so much time in meetings and doing modules on DEI, it's going to weaken your military.
Yes, Adrian, I'm going to come back to you quickly because we've spoken many times about geopolitical issues and the wars that are ongoing. Do you think that this could have any ramifications for the involvement and the US involvement across the world, and how could that play out?
That's good. Another great question, Joshua. I don't think it is. I think people will pounce on that and say this is going to embolden China. We're taking our eye off China. This is to make Russia stronger. This could lead to more flare-ups around the globe. I think this is more of evaluating, assessing, cutting back, and then building back up. We're in a transitional phase. The days of sending 100,000 troops in any conflict, that many boots on the ground, are over. The days of conventional warfare are over with large set-piece battles. And we need a military to reflect that. It needs to be smaller. It needs to be nimble. It needs to be extremely effective. It needs to be equipped with the correct firepower. And I still think we will still have that. I think people will look at this who want to criticize these decisions and say, oh, this is going to leave America in a very tight position. I don't think so. Not at all.
Major General Dawedi, I'll come to you so our audience can get an understanding of these transitions that Adrian's talked about. Obviously, it is going to involve personnel changes, but also changes to the infrastructure, changes to the way things have been running. Is this potentially the first step in that? And then how would that play out?
Well, first and foremost, let me clarify that Tulsi Gabbard and also Hegseth, they are not NCOs. They were colonel level officers in the mid of the pyramid.
No, sir, Hegseth was. Fair enough, we can take this offline, but
yeah,
please
check it out.
Yeah, sure, we'll check it out.
Well,
I mean, they are not general ranks, please.
Yeah, I'm not talking, they're not non-commissioned officers either.
Fair enough. Pardon my exact military language.
Please let me finish.
I understand.
Later.
Agree.
Yeah, because I have spent 40 years in the army.
Sure, sir, not taking away. Pardon my...
Rabinder, I'll come to you afterwards. I'll come to you afterwards, Rabinder.
Yeah. The second point is China. Yeah, I served as defense secretary in China and North Korea for 3 years, and I commanded my forces on China. Well, today, as far as the American threat perception is concerned, the American doctrines, they are very China-specific. And you can't take off the eyes from China because that's where the American strategists, American doctrine, people who profound doctrine, they look at China. The third point is, it's across the board. Armed forces are not equal opportunity organizations. They go purely on merit. And they have a system in place. Those systems are well tried out. And fourth point is, armed forces always transform. Transformation is inherent in the armed forces. And transformation takes place because of, first and foremost, you look at the threat perception, and secondly also, you look at how you want to modernize, how you want to fight in future warfare. Well, it's, I think, a misnomer to say that the future conventional wars are out. Not really. The future wars will be fought on different platforms. They'll be fought in hybrid warfare, they'll be fought on gray zone warfare, and they'll be fought in conventional warfare as well. Because why conventional wars take place? When there is an asymmetric capability. It's only capability which ensures that there is a certain amount of degree of stability. And this is what the ethos of the American armed forces say, that we deter and then we fight and defeat. So therefore, I think that transformation is very much part of every armed forces. Armed forces are not equal opportunity organization, but in the armed forces, when you transform, you don't destroy the legacy, because armed forces are very traditional. They are based on legacy. So it is a continuity in change, but you don't destroy the pyramid, or you don't destroy the basic parameters. So all I can say is that any drastic changes will have impact. They have to be calibrated. They have to be well thought through. And last point is loyalty. Please remember, in the armed forces, loyalty is three-dimensional. Your loyalty to your subordinates, your loyalty to your colleagues, your loyalty to your organization, and your loyalty to your superiors. It's not a one-way street. It is multi-dimensional, and we are loyal to the chair. We are loyal to the organization. Personal loyalties, of course, they are debatable. Over to you.
Rabinder Sachdev, I want to look now at the appointments and how easy it will be for these appointments to come into the job. We know, of course, that Caine has been nominated by Trump to take over from Brown. but he's retired. How easy will it be for him to slot back into that position, having been outside of work for a while, but also in other positions as well? Is it going to be easy for somebody to come in and pick straight up from where the previous person left off?
Thank you so much. Just to clarify a bit and then we move on. Hegseth was a major in the American National Guard. Tulsi Gabbard was a lieutenant colonel. Pardon my, for the brevity of time, taking up on the act of national NCOs, I was trying to make a point, General Dwivedi, that it was generals in the first administration. Now, these are the guys who've been in the trenches, a major and a lieutenant colonel. There's a huge difference. You're a general, sir, you would know. Wherever.
Not the NCOs. NCOs
No, fair
are
enough.
not
So pardon my little, gap in military life.
That's all.
Fair enough. Thanks. So the point is generals, and now these guys are in trenches. Now to the point that you asked, Joseph, I think it will not be much difficult. Though I mean it's unprecedented. Somebody from retirement being called in, if I understand, to head the chief of staff. This is something unprecedented. But I think what's happening, there is so much shock and awe going around in Washington, D.C. You look at everything, every day, every 4 hours, there are some executive orders, something or the other, federal filings, new this thing, Musk, Treasury, etc., right? And in this momentum, I think, or in the context of the political environment in the U.S. right now, I do not actually think there'll be any much, much difficulty. Sure, it will raise a few eyebrows, more than a few eyebrows, complaints and this and that. But what's happening right now is a re-governmenting of what a government means is being created by Trump and of course Musk and their advisors. So, and they're pushing the envelope. By the way, yes, the point is they're pushing the envelope. All of their executive orders, by their, I mean the US administration current orders, etc., are being challenged in courts, lower level courts, higher courts. Some are moving up. America is becoming and will become and will run
Elizabeth Larris, to
with the outcome of courtroom battles. That's where America is right now.
Apologies, Rabinda, we lost you for a second there. But Elizabeth Larris, to wrap up this discussion, do you think that Trump's changes and Trump's announcement to cutting staff but also cutting workforce will leave the American military in a better position, or do you think potentially that there is a situation here where too much fat will be trimmed?
I think eventually it will be stronger. Hegseth has come in, and his major emphasis is the war fighter ethos, right? And so, eyes are on making the military stronger. And that's the whole idea of these purges, getting out the fat, getting out the people who either unfortunately were caught up in this DEI stuff because they had to be or they really believed it. And so I think in the long run, we'll have a more focused military, which is extremely important for facing our foes.
Elizabeth, Adrian, Major General Dwivedi and Rabinda, thank you very much for joining us and providing your insight. The shake-ups in the US are continuing and we'll be here to bring you all of them.